Hello, party people. Um, for this training, we're going to be talking about crisis intervention, and more importantly, trauma-informed crisis intervention, which is crucial to what we're doing here at Safe Place, because pretty much everyone who comes in and works with us has experienced significant trauma. We'll say everybody who's come in and worked with us has experienced significant trauma. Um, and there's so much that we've been learning, even in just recent years, about how trauma affects the brain and how we can best serve our clients and have those crisis intervention services with that trauma informed focus. So, we're going to start that PowerPoint right now. Let me just pull this up for us. All right. From beginning. Okay, let me plug in my computer so it doesn't die on us. That would be bad. I would be really sad about that. Okay, so trauma-informed crisis intervention. Let's talk about it. Okay, let's talk about trauma. It's probably a pretty important thing to start with. So trauma can stem from a single experience or from multiple experiences. So it could be one, obviously, maybe very major experience that happens in your life, or it can be a pattern of experiences that has, happened over the course of, some arbitrary period of time. These things build on each other. Trauma builds on itself unless we are able to deal with it appropriately. But even then, our brain, it affects our brain in a very specific way, which we're going to talk more about. But again, it builds on itself, so the severity can increase based on the amount of traumatic events we have experienced. It can be an actual or a perceived threat to a person's well-being. So this is really crucial. Something traumatic doesn't actually have had to happen to you to experience trauma. That sounds kind of counterintuitive, sounds kind of confusing. Maybe an analogy would help. So an example of this might be if somebody were to be in the vicinity of a traumatic thing, like maybe a school shooting or a bombing or something like that. Somebody might be in the vicinity or have maybe a loved one who was there. Something like that, where our brain is perceiving a threat even if we aren't in that immediate line of fire. That's just one example. There are other things we can come up with, but we'll stick with that for now. It can have a negative impact on a person's daily life, including their coping mechanisms. People cope and choose to cope in all different ways. This is based on maybe what they've been taught throughout their life, how they've been taught to cope. And some of these coping skills that we use are healthy and some of them are not healthy. And that's really based on the individual and what kind of work they've done. Okay, and it can color one's perspective and change behavioral responses. So this is pretty straightforward, but when we experience trauma, again, it does affect our brain and it does everything we experience, whether it's traumatic or not. All of our experiences color our perception. So we look at the world through a lens of our experiences. I look through the world as through the lens of being a woman, maybe through the lens of being a social worker. So I'm going to see things very differently than maybe my brother who's an engineer. Obviously a very basic example, but there's one for you. And trauma is just the same. It colors our perspective on the world. Okay. This word always makes me cringe when I see it. Traumatization. So experiencing trauma. It occurs when we're being traumatized. It occurs when an individual's internal and external resources are inadequate for coping. So what are internal and external resources? Well, our internal resources are things that we possess all of the time. They're just kind of inside us. It's similar to, or one example would be what we refer to as resilience, and how resilient a person is. That's kind of our internal um, resources. What coping skills do we have? Do I have like naturally really high anxiety? Do I have naturally like low anxiety, really good anxiety management skills? These are things that affect our internal, that are included in our internal resources. Our external resources are things that are around us. It could be a million things. Our support system is huge, friends and family. If we're close in proximity to them, and if we're close in intimacy to friends and family, those are huge external resources. Money, like food, housing, these are all external resources. I mean, think about if you got into a car accident, um, and like the first thing that you want to do after you get into a car accident, obviously you deal with yourself and make sure you're okay and all of that. But maybe for me, the first thing I might want to do is like call my mom and say, like, I just experienced this really traumatic thing, and I want to have somebody who can come and get me or make sure I'm okay, or whatever I need, or even just to vent to or talk to about it. Um, but if I had no friends, family, anyone that I'm close to, no one to like make that call right after, like I'm gonna have to internalize some of that trauma that I maybe would have been able to process and share via having a support system. I'm gonna have to take that on myself. Additionally, like if I wreck my car and am I don't have any money, don't have any financial resources, the trauma of that experience is going to be far greater, because you're adding on the stress of having been through this to the stress of, okay, what do I do now? And how do I move forward? And this is going to affect so much of the rest of my life. It's taking this big toll. These are all, our external resources. So when a trauma is too big for us to cope via those resources, we're going to hang on to it, and it's going to manifest somehow in our body and our brains. And we're going to have to deal with that. Okay. So some people experience triggers. That's a fun word that's been up for debate lately on whether or not that's a real thing. Triggers are a real thing. You can be triggered by anything in your environment. It can be, you could be watching a show and something happens and you're triggered by it. It could be something someone says and you're triggered. It could even be like maybe a stranger standing too close to you. Maybe it's a certain smell that reminds you of this experience. But nonetheless, pretty much anything could be a trigger. But what it does is reminds our body, our brain, our body of a trauma that we experienced, and it puts us back into that place and has our brain react as if the trauma is happening again. So something that you might consider in that same vein, in that same situation, is that our fight or flight response is very active when we've experienced trauma. That's one of the effects on the brain. Or now we really consider fight, flight, or freeze to be all valid, real responses to trauma. But our fight or flight or freeze response, it happens like right in the back of our brain. It's very instinctual. It's not something that we control very easily. You have to put a lot of work into to kind of understand how that affects your body and control those feelings when they come up. However, because they are very instinctual. And someone who's experienced trauma, those are going to be more activated. They're almost more at the ready to respond with the fight or flight or freeze, which is why triggers are huge, because we're just as easily triggered, it puts us back in that place. Our fight or flight or freeze is ready to respond. Our body's ready to go into that mode. So that might cause several different reactions from people. Other effects on the brain are it can affect your attention and your awareness, your emotion regulation. So some people who have experienced severe trauma might not be able to regulate their emotions as much. Maybe from moment to moment, they'll be very, very happy or very, in a good place, or at least very balanced, and go to very angry quickly, or go to crying really upset really quickly, because they just don't have that same control over regulating your emotions. Decision making. I have a hard time making decisions about like what I'm going to eat for dinner, but and this is the same with anyone who has experienced trauma. Your decision making, obviously I gave like a stupid example, but your decision making is interrupted, so that even the simplest things can be a whole, like make your head spin, and can become something bigger than it needs to be. Sleep disruption, obviously that was pretty self-explanatory. Memory loss, because trauma paralyzes our frontal lobe. That's where we have a lot of our memory. That's where we hold our personality. So when you experience trauma, there's memory loss is often associated. Also, our brain does this sometimes helpful thing, sometimes less helpful thing, where it can like block memories that are very traumatic, and therefore some people have like disassociated during traumatic events, because our brain's like, oh, this is too much, i need to kind of shut down. So some people have disassociated, so their memories are like in bits and pieces. We'll talk some more about that. But that can happen. And then physical pain, some people experience like physical pain as a manifestation of their trauma, and will see doctors for it, and doctors will be like, there's no physical reason for you to be experiencing pain, but our brain is just so crazy. It's crazy. It works in really weird ways, and that this is one of those instances where we have all of this thing inside of us, this trauma, and it almost is like we need to have it manifest somehow for it to make sense. And physical pain is one thing that people tend to grasp a little bit better, because they can usually see it. They can usually point to a spot and be like, oh, my, whatever hurts. But again, this is often, people can experience the physical pain, but there's usually no, if it's due to trauma, there'll be no like physical reason for this person to be experiencing pain in that area. Okay, so what we do at S.A.F.E Place is survivor-centered advocacy. So this is different than, this is what most advocates should be doing at this point. Most like organizations like ours should be doing, but we're survivor-centered, which means that we're meeting everybody where they're at. We're focusing on survivor strengths and resources. So we do not believe we're the experts, even though, yeah, we have lots of experience in this field. We know a lot about domestic violence, but we're not the expert on each individual person's experience. Everybody has an individual experience. And part of our job is to allow them to maybe feel that and process that in a place that's safe, and where we're not telling them how they feel or how they're supposed to feel. We're survivor driven. We understand that violence can happen to any of us, which is really, really true. It varies from crisis-driven, short-term, and long-term. We know this to be very true. This is proven like just through looking at our different services. Obviously, our shelter, people have stayed in our shelter for a couple hours to up to, a few months. And I've had counseling clients who've come to one session and counseling clients who I've been seeing for, almost 3 years. So everybody has, again, that different experience, and we're just meeting people. We're meeting people where they're at. We're finding out what they need in that moment and kind of letting them guide their recovery process. We're focused on restoring a sense of control. As you know about domestic violence by now, it's all about power and control and taking away someone's power and control. So we have survivors, come to our door who have had their own control, their own autonomy stripped from them for, however long. And part of our job is to help people understand that, or help people take that control back. Includes providing information, resources, and education. Those things are all great because that's how we support people, again, where they're at. Someone might be like, oh, I'm in a place where I need resources, I need housing. Someone else might really need education in order to process their experience. Someone might need a little bit of everything. What we do is point, if not provide them ourselves, point them in the right direction. Okay. So our counseling process, I'll go more into this in my counseling training, but just a quick, short little rundown about counseling at Safe Place. Ideally, it's a safe place. I mean, gotcha there. It's a safe place where people to feel safe to disclose and process what they went through. This is very intimate details, vulnerable details of their life. So ideally, we want them to feel very safe. It's confidential. We provide unconditional support and respect. Doesn't matter what a person's coming into anyone's office and talking about, what part of their experience they're talking about. We aren't here to judge people. We're here to provide that unconditional support. And then again, giving the client back that sense of autonomy, or actually more appropriately, allowing them a space where they can take it back. We provide, again, education. Domestic violence education is a huge part of the counseling process. We do a lot of active listening and reflective listening. So just sometimes that's all you need. When you're going through something really hard, really traumatic, when you're in crisis, sometimes all you need is for someone to listen and tell you and remind you that maybe you're not crazy. Some people feel really strongly that maybe they're crazy and their experience isn't valid. So part of that is just listening and allowing them to feel heard and know that no one thinks they're crazy, and we in fact know that they're not. And safety planning. Safety planning's huge at Safe Place, of course, because especially when you leave a violent relationship, that is the most dangerous time. I know Melissa and Katie talk about that in their training, and how important it is so important to meet clients where they are when it comes to safety planning. I'll talk about that more in counseling, in the counseling training, and risk assessment. Again, each client's individual. Each client has their individual vulnerabilities. So we're meeting the client where they're at with that. All right, the role of the advocate. Okay, so our roles at Safe Place, any advocate at Safe Place, from volunteers to our CEO, is we have our role is rooted in the empowerment philosophy. So what we do is we provide information, we identify options with the client, we provide practical assistance and support. And the reason why we do those things, or the philosophy behind it, is that empowerment philosophy, which is, as the PowerPoint says, it's designed to increase the degree of autonomy and self-determination. It's based on the idea that human beings have the capacity to make their own choices. So what we're not going to do as advocates at Safe Place, we're not going to have clients come in and tell them, okay, you need to do A, B, C, D, you need to get up, you need to go, get your job, get your housing, get your blah, 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 whatever. We're not here to do that. We're not here to tell people to even leave their abusers. What we're here to do is quite literally provide a safe place for those who are trying to leave, or even those who just need respite. What we're here is, we have tools, we have support, we have people who care, and if somebody would like to access that, that is completely up to them. And anything they would like to access that we can help them with is completely up to them. And we're not going to ask them to do anything specific. They don't have to do anything in order to receive those services, except for ask. So, and that's again part of how we help clients feel in control of themselves again, and feel like they have autonomy, and they can go forward and make the decisions they want to make with our support, with the tools that we the supports we can point them in the direction of. Okay. But some of our goals of empowerment advocacy is to place the blame where it belongs. It's really important, as you can imagine. A lot of clients take on blame for their situation, and that's a tactic of pretty much every abuser across the board, is to blame the victim. And that's even like a societal construct that we have. We're very quick to blame the victim. So what we like to do, well, one of our goals at Safe Place is to make sure we are placing blame appropriately. Reducing isolation. So like we talked about with external resources for coping, reducing isolation is one of those ways that we increase those external resources. We ideally provide people with people, so that they feel less alone. Maybe they're less alone in their experience, or they feel like they have people who care and are ready to support them, whatever it is that that client in particular is looking for. That's one of our goals. Right along with that, rebuilding networks and support, reestablishing personal power and control. We talked a lot about that. Building on current strengths. Part of what we love to do is find where our clients have individual strengths. Obviously, every person has strengths that they rely on to make it through life, and we like to help clients identify what their personal strengths are, and then use those moving forward. Regaining control, providing safety, of course, helping the survivor to integrate the traumatic event in their life. So that's a big part of our counseling process, is integrating the traumatic event. But this is also just a goal, again, of all of the advocates, top to bottom at Safe Place. What we don't want to do is make the client obsess over the traumatic experience. We don't want day and night them to be thinking about what happened and what they went through, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's not what their world revolves around, and that's not what makes them, that's not who they are. They are not that traumatic event. On the other hand, it's sometimes just as easy to say, okay, don't think about it ever again, just block it out, pretend it never happened, yada, 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 when that's just can be just as harmful, because trauma did happen. And as you've seen, it does affect our brain. And if we just kind of brush it away and pretend like, oh, no, that's not real, then that can manifest in many different ways, like we talked about, even down to like physical pain. If you're not finding that balance of, okay, I'm not going to ignore my experience, I'm not going to pretend like it didn't happen, I'm not going to obsess over it. What I'm going to do is integrate it into my life. I'm going to process it, maybe, create my own personal narrative, own it, and then move on, knowing that, yes, this happens, this colors my perspective, but it doesn't make me who I am. Or, I mean, it colors my perspective, but it isn't who I am. Okay, some factors that interfere with helping. These are things we try to not do at Safe Place. We don't give advice. We again we provide access to tools and support, but we don't give advice. We are not the experts on each individual's experience. In the same vein, we don't immediately try to solve the problem. Some people aren't quite in the problem solving phase. Some people are in the phase where they're still feeling their experience, and they're still processing and maybe even working on integrating, but maybe they're not quite ready for a solution focused experience. And it can be not helpful if somebody approaches you with their problems and you go, oh, well, that's easy, just do ABC. That might not be easy for them. We don't know their individual experiences, and it might not be something they're even ready for. So first and foremost is active listening and validating, and just providing that warm um, person support system, external resource for them to access. Thinking we know best, again, these are kind of in the same vein. And not understanding cultural differences. So this is huge. Again, think of things that color our perception. Think of ways that we're different from the people around us and how that might impact how we view the world. So, and our clients are in the same boat where they have differences to us. They're going to have different experiences based on cultural differences. And in that, us assuming that we can just apply certain rules across the board, it's not fair to our clients, it's not fair to us, it's not fair to our clients. So that's one thing that we definitely try to avoid. Okay, so self-awareness. We love self-awareness. We love self-awareness in this kind of work because um, it can really hugely interfere our ability to help our clients if we don't remain self-aware and know what our personal values are. Because if we don't know what our personal values are, and are able to identify those ourselves, we might put those on our clients in a way that's inappropriate, because as you know, our personal values, my personal values may not be your personal values, and your personal values may not be a client's personal values, and et cetera, et cetera. So again, this is very much the self-awareness thing. It's like, don't make it about you. And it's simple. It's how we create good boundaries, as well, so we don't take the work home. Know your limits. Know when you need to step away from a situation, maybe because of a personal value. There's no shame in that. Well, there shouldn't be. There's no shame in going to your supervisor and saying, like, hey, I need to step away. I need to not do this particular job with this particular client just because I have this personal value and I don't want to harm the client in any way by expressing my values at all to them. And I don't know how to go about doing this without getting into values. And that's totally fine when it comes down to it. If you have the client's best interest in mind and you go to your supervisor with that, like, that's all that we care about. That's all that we want to do, is create this safe environment for our clients. So if you're unable to do that, that's okay. You just got to let someone know. And be conscious of nonverbal communication. There's so much that we portray through our faces, through our hands. I know I'm a swimmer. I, use my hands a lot when I'm talking and expressing myself. And there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that people can pick up on. And being self-aware can be really helpful to not let those like maybe negative nonverbal things slide, and let clients, again, what we want clients to do is feel safe and feel supportive, um, and not feel like, oh, you're rolling your eyes behind their back, or you think they're making a bad decision, or et cetera, et cetera. All right. And then quickly, let's talk about technology safety. This is something we're having to talk about more and more. This list that I have on the screen right now is so not comprehensive. It's not even funny. But here are a few little safety measures that we use frequently when it comes to working with a client who is concerned about safety with technology. Sorry about that. So what it really comes down to, though, is when we're talking about safety planning in any way, shape, or form, especially with technology, we have to know that these safety measures are not universal. Not everybody, the answer for everybody isn't going to be to block their abuser. Sometimes that is more dangerous, to block somebody and not know what they're spreading around on the internet, or not know what they're trying to say to you, or et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes that can be more dangerous. Sometimes it is the answer to just cut someone off and block them, but we have to be conscious and ask a lot of questions to make sure we're making the best plan with each individual client. Signs of spyware. Some signs of spyware could be, that your phone or your computer is losing battery more quickly than it usually does. That could be a sign that someone's like got your phone tapped. If you're ever concerned about an abuser having like intimate images of you, and um, and possibly using those or spreading those, there are safety measures through pretty much each individual like social media platform to, either do those image searches, or even you can even make it so you can like send those images, which just sounds really weird, but you can even like send those images into like Facebook, and Facebook will put an algorithm, like a fingerprint on that image, and make it so nobody can share that image if it matches, what you've sent them. So again, there's a million different things that we can talk about here. Really, just if you're working with a client on safety tips for technology, know that it's so different. This is so comprehensive, and it's always changing. Or I'm sorry, it's always changing, and it can be such a words are hard. Basically can impact so many different aspects of your life. I mean, down to if you have like an Alexa at home, if you have an Echo Dot at home, if you have if you have technology where you can change, like turn on lights in your home, or even change like temperature settings. These are things that a lot of abusers are using and taking advantage of. Pretty much everything they can get their hands on to make you feel crazy, make you feel out of control. So the sky's the limit with technology, and we're still learning, we're still growing, it's still developing. So just like everything else, meet the client where they're at, do your best to listen, and make a plan that's appropriate for what's going on in their lives. Okay, so that is Trauma-informed crisis intervention. It's quick, easy one, pretty straightforward. If you have any kind of questions, feel free to follow up with your supervisor or with me. I'd love to talk to you more about it. But yeah.